I'm the Senior Director of Programs for Thrive. We're the Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County. I think most of you are familiar with Thrive. I want to just take a moment to kind of recognize this really unique time in our county and just recognize the sadness that many people are experiencing right now between the damage from the floods and horrific violence in Half Moon Bay. And I know that affects all of us. So I just wanted to make sure that we just took a minute to appreciate that and appreciate being in community. That's something that we're all feeling together. Thrive role is very much to bring community together, especially the nonprofit community. And we do this through policy and advocacy. We do it through capacity building. We do it through cross-sector collaboration. And this is just one example of that. And we do this in many different subject areas: children and education, arts and culture, and of course, environment and sustainability. So we're going to go to our slides. I want to tell you about one thing that's coming up. So we have a lot of efforts to support the nonprofit community, and one of them is really building the relationship with government. And so we have an event coming up on February 7th that we hope you can all attend, that is with the county, and it's actually being hosted by the county. And we're going to have, Thrive is going to present a kind of a summary of the nonprofit landscape, what it looks like right now. In addition to that, we'll have Shireen Malakafarsi from the county, who is our Chief Equity Officer, and Mike Callaghy, the county executive, talking about what, sorry, our slides aren't quite in sync yet, but they will be just a second. There we go. Talking about the relationship between government and nonprofits. So we hope you can all come. It's open to everyone. It's at the San Mateo County Event Center, and you can find this and a lot of other information on our website. If you go to our website, all of our upcoming events are there, as well as you can sign up for newsletters, you can sign up for membership, and anything else you might want. So today I am really excited about our speakers. We really, as Anna was just saying, it's like we have superstars here. And as far as flooding goes, we have all of the best people who know what's really going on in the county, and really excited to be able to introduce each of them. So first of all, we have Kirsten Anderswind from Peninsula Clean Energy. Then Makena Wong from OneShoreline. Felix Nelson from the Resource Conservation District, also known as RCD, and then Reed Bogart from CCAG, and I'm going to mess that one up. So county agencies of city and county, go ahead, say it, Reed.
Yeah, City and County Association of Governments for San Mateo County.
And Kate Kennedy from Climate Resilient Communities. So with this, we're going to be able to kind of talk about the whole gamut of different approaches to dealing with all of that rain that came from the sky this time, kind of unexpectedly large quantities. So I'm really honored to be able to introduce Anna Miscolta. Anna Miscolta is Thrive's relatively new Director of Community Resilience. It was not her intention to start and immediately be thrown into a bunch of unexpected emergencies, but she's done a fantastic job, and she will be moderating today's panel, as well as telling you a little bit about Thrive Rise. So with that, Anna.
Thank you, Petra. So I'll just spend a few minutes talking about Thrive Rise, which is San Mateo County's new COAD. And when I say San Mateo County, I mean it's not a county endeavor, but we are in collaboration with the county. If you're at this meeting, you have probably received an email from me over the past couple of weeks. During storm response, we really utilized our broad network to get emergency information out to as many people as possible, even if they weren't part of the proper COAD. So I'll just, take advantage of this moment to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. Can I get the next slide, please? Or do I have? Thank you. So COADs they're a thing. They're not just something that we made up in San Mateo County. They're networks of nonprofits, government, private sector. So a multi-sector, multidisciplinary coalition really of organizations that respond to unmet community needs during and after disasters, and to an extent also do risk reduction work before disasters. The two really big purposes of them are to be kind of a hub for information and communication and resource sharing, because what we find is that when organizations are in disaster mode, they can inadvertently silo themselves, just trying to make sure that, that they're functioning and that their direct communities are getting their services. But we sometimes miss the big picture, right? We sometimes miss what other organizations are doing. We might have an organization in the county who's offering something we need, but we don't know about it. So having the central channel of communication is really important to avoiding duplication of efforts, but also making sure that we can share resources in times of high need. And then the other big thing that we're focusing on in the COAD is just ensuring that we have a two-way communication between the county and the cities who are really in charge of that first response, and also the community-based organizations on the ground who really do have a good understanding of local needs. And some of our CBOs do door knocking, they do wellness checks, and they can also put that they can also move that information, put that information up to the county so that that can inform disaster response. And a big thing that I want to drive home here is that you do not need to be an emergency type organization to join a COAD. And indeed, most organizations in COADs, they do all types of things. So if you're in doubt, join the network, at least join the mailing list, and you can learn more about it. And on the next slide, we have a couple of events coming up so that you can engage a little bit more. We have our first working meeting on February 22nd, and we will be in collaboration with SF Card, Heather Lee, who I saw is actually on this call today. We are going to be offering 4 different trainings on the second Thursday of every month through June. Each one will have a different theme, and it's very hands-on exercises, and everyone is welcome. It's free. And if you have any questions, you can email me, Anna@thrivealliance.org. And with that, I think we'll move on into the event. So as Petra was mentioning, next slide, please. We've had a very rough month in this county. The storms, they came in succession. A lot of our community members are still dealing with the aftermath of those storms and the floods and the mudslides and the power outages that came with them. And now we have yet another crisis on the coast. And so just, I think, coming together in this space with all of you as stakeholders and community members is really wonderful, and almost kind of cathartic to be able to just have this space to debrief on what happened, and also to listen to these 4 organizations that are so involved in risk reduction in our county. They're really experts in flood risk reduction and experts in other things as well. And of course, another big question of today is like, a lot of people were surprised by those storms, and residents who have lived here a long time said, wow, I've never seen that before. So this kind of begs the question of like, what is a typical flood for us, and how should we shift the conversation to what our local flood risk is, and make sure that residents are aware of what that is. And then I think the big part of this conversation is what is next, and how do we drive forward all of the great nature-based solutions that organizations are already doing in our county. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kirsten Andrew Schwind from Peninsula Clean Energy. She is going to give a presentation on what PCE is doing in light of the storms and what resources they're offering.
Thank you so much, Anna. It really is great to have you doing emergency work here in our community, and great to have the COAD up and running. Let's see, do you have the slides up? For some reason, I'm not seeing that on my view. But while you bring that up, Peninsula Clean Energy is the community energy provider here in San Mateo County. And okay, I'm spotlighted. Are the slides up though?
We see the slides. Do you not see them?
I don't see them, which was probably an issue on my end. So let me.
Kirsten, have you used the slider? See the slider that you can kind of scroll across, make yourself larger or smaller, probably at the left of your screen.
Okay. That helps.
Thanks for bearing with us.
Yeah, sorry about this.
Does everyone else see the slides okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Odd. All right. All right. Well, I'm going to dive in and maybe I can get the slides on my other screen here in the meanwhile. So yeah, so Peninsula Clean Energy is the electricity provider for San Mateo County, and so we're not a flood control district. But that said, we do work on the root causes of extreme weather, which is climate change, and by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping community members save money at the same time. But that said, we can also help customers or residents who have been impacted by flooding. And I'm still not seeing the slides. Give me a moment here to change my view. Okay, there we go. Got it. Apologize for that. Yes, so we have rebates specifically for people who may have had flooded appliances and cars. So we'll go into that. Next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned, climate change drives weather extremes. And if you were personally impacted by that, or people that you work with in your organization are personally impacted, very sorry. That's a lot to deal with. So if your car was flooded, and we know a number of cars in San Mateo County were flooded, if you had a major appliance that was flooded, for example, here's a picture of a flooded basement, and that thing sticking out is a water heater. That water heater isn't safe to use anymore after the electronics have flooded. So your water heater may be in a basement, your furnace may be in a basement, and once they flood, they really may not be safe. And so there may be folks out there who are trying to replace these major appliances. And it is actually a good opportunity to fight climate change at the same time you're replacing your appliance by replacing your appliance with an electric one. Next slide. Oh, next slide. Oh, great. There we are. Yes. So one of the biggest recent ways that Peninsula Clean Energy is fighting climate change is by cleaning up our power supplies so that your electricity is 100% greenhouse gas free, or 100% clean, I should say. And then helping everyone switch the energy they use to using that electricity instead of methane gas, because methane gas is one of the problems. It causes air pollution in your home, in your community, and it also causes climate change. So anytime you need to replace appliance, if you can replace it with an electric appliance, you're part of the solution. Next slide. So how we work is that we provide 100% clean electricity. It goes through PG&E's wires. So we're a little bit behind the scenes. We're buying your electricity, and we serve just about everybody in San Mateo County. So if you're thinking, I didn't sign up for that, You didn't need to. It's an automatic enrollment program. It's automatic benefit of living in San Mateo County. You're probably getting our electricity, and you're helping the environment, you're saving money, and you didn't have to do anything. So that's good news. Next slide. Okay, so let's dive into the good stuff here, which is how we can help you replace your cars and appliances with electric alternatives. So you've probably heard a lot about electric vehicles, but they're fun, they're fast, but a really important thing here is that they help you save money. Consumer Reports found that by buying an electric car instead of a gas car, you can save $6,000 to $10,000 on fuel and maintenance over the lifetime of the vehicle compared to a similar gas car. So it's really an economic win as well for households. You don't have to go to gas stations anymore, no more oil changes, no more smog checks, none of that is necessary. You can just plug into any normal outlet at home. And you don't actually need to install any kind of fancy charger. You have an outlet that isn't serving another major appliance, regular 120 outlet, you have an electric car charger. The cars actually come with a cord. You can plug into any normal outlet and charge at home. It's a lot easier than people think, and more economical than people think. So next slide. So there are a number of rebates and incentives for electric cars, and this is just a few of them. There is, in the Inflation Reduction Act that passed last summer, there's a lot of goodies, but including rebates for electric cars. There's a federal tax credit. Actually, I should take myself back. Not a rebate, a federal tax credit. So you do need to pay taxes. Federal tax credit of up to $7,500, up to, on new cars. In California, the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project also has up to $7,000 on new cars. Peninsula Clean Energy offers between $700 to $6,000 depending on your income for used, and that's rebates on used cars. Then Clean Cars for All, also between $5,500 and $9,500 rebates on new and used cars, and some of these you can stack. So you can actually, these are big amounts of money, and so you can actually save a lot on a car. And then you've got that $6,000 to $10,000 of savings on the maintenance. So it starts to look more affordable. Next slide, please. So a little more on the rebate from Peninsula Clean Energy on used electric vehicles. Anybody, regardless of your income, can get a $1,000 rebate on a used electric vehicle that's fully electric, or if you get a plug-in hybrid electric, that's $700 rebate. But if you have a qualifying income, you can get up to a $6,000 rebate on a used electric vehicle. And again, this is stackable. You can add it to other rebates out and tax incentives out there. Next slide, please. This is just for residents of San Mateo County. So here is a real life example. This is brought to us by our friends of Actera, who run great workshops and have personalized services for people who are thinking about buying an EVs and want to help navigate the whole rebate and tax incentive landscape, which is more and more generous and more complicated. Go talk to Actera if you need help. But this is a real life example on a relatively recent vintage Chevy Volt plug-in hybrid. Original price on this used car was $22,000. With the trade-in and state rebates, this customer saved $9,500, and then they qualified for another $3,700 from Peninsula Clean Energy, ended up paying only $8,800 for a $22,000 car. So this is how it can really add up. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's switch over to that picture of the flooded basement with the water heater in it. If you're in the fortunate situation where you need to replace a water heater, you can replace it with a with a electric water heater, electric heat pump water heater. Or if you had your furnace flood, you can replace that with also a heat pump, but that does space heating. And bonus, it's not just a furnace, it's also an air conditioner in the same appliance. So if you never had air conditioning, but boy, last summer you're thinking that would have been nice, you can get both in one thing. So we have rebates on water heaters, $3,000, but then when you add another $1,000 from Bayren, which is a regional agency, that's $4,000 on rebates between the two of us. On the heating and cooling, $4,500. And also there is now a $2,000 federal tax credit from the Inflation Reduction Act. There are also adders. If you are income qualified, you can get another $1,000 rebate. If you need to do an electrical panel upgrade to accommodate this, there's another $1,500 rebate. That really adds up. If you have, after all this, in fact, it can add up to $9,000 if you qualify for all of that for your project. And if you have additional costs in your project after that, you can finance that at 0% interest and up to $10,000 through Peninsula Clean Energy. No credit check required. You just pay back in monthly installments on your PG&E bill. And I'm not saying it's easy to replace a gas appliance with electric appliance. It is a little more complicated. The contractors aren't used to doing this, and so they'll probably, the easiest thing for them to do is to go, replace your gas appliance with another gas appliance. You do need to work a little bit harder to find a contractor that will do this, but it's not that hard. Go to Bayren. And actually, you can start with the link to Peninsula Clean Energy's website, and then we'll link you over to our partners at Bayren. They have a list of qualified contractors. Reach out to them and get some quotes. Next slide. In fact, here we are. How to get started. First, look at the program information at peninsulacleanenergy.com under residents, and it'll walk you through the information on electric vehicles or these electric appliances. If you're looking for a used EV, first fill out the Peninsula Clean Energy web form before you purchase, so you can pre-qualify for the rebate. And then a specialist will contact you in English or Spanish and walk you through the process and help you stack or add on additional incentives. So you actually talk to a real person there. For the appliances, go to our website and you'll be connected with a list of contractors who do this work. Reach out to get 3 quotes. Hot tip, I was on a webinar this morning about the cost of electrifying your house. The nonprofit Sunwork gets really good prices on heat pump water heaters. So that might be a good one to look into. And any questions you have, you can email programs@peninsulacleanenergy.com. I think that's my last slide. And want to ask if there's any questions.
All right, and if you do have questions, we are going to have a dedicated Q&A at the end, and you can ask questions of any speaker. So we'll move on to OneShoreline. We have Makena Wong here, who's a project manager with OneShoreline. Makena, do you want to get started?
Yes, thank you, Anna. I'm sharing my screen now, so let me know if that is not progressing or you guys are not seeing that, but I'll go ahead and continue. As Anna mentioned, my name is Makena. I'm a project manager with the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, or OneShoreline for short, which is a lot easier to say. In my presentation, I'll cover 3 main points. First, I'll provide a brief introduction to OneShoreline, speak a bit about San Mateo County's flood risk and what we most recently experienced in the storms that ended about 10 days ago, and then speak a little bit about how we address this flood risk, really teeing up the conversation and hopefully digging in more into the discussion in the discussion portion later. So for those of you who aren't familiar with OneShoreline, I'll speak a little bit about why we were created and the work we do. San Mateo County has been found by many studies to be the most vulnerable county in the state to the first 3 feet of sea level rise. And this is in terms of the population impacted as well as the property value. And you can see that just in the way that our county is situated on the peninsula, we are facing water from both sides, both the San Francisco Bay and the Pacific coast. And another important note is that the populations at risk from sea level rise in San Mateo County are disproportionately low income, which means that the median income of the communities that are in the sea level rise floodplain is lower than the median income countywide. So because of these facts and the fact that really this is a transformative issue that no individual city or developer or business owner can face on their own, it needs to be a region-wide response to sea level rise. OneShoreline was created. So we were established by state legislation on January 1st, 2020, and we are the first government agency, independent government agency in the state that is focused on building resilience to the water-related impacts of climate change. And we look to take a holistic approach to the issue in 3 key ways. So first, in terms of the threats, when I say water-related impacts of climate change, I mean sea level rise, I mean flooding from rivers and creeks, stormwater, as well as coastal erosion, which we experience very acutely on our Pacific coastline of the county. OneShoreline also looks to take a holistic approach to geography, and this is really the heart of why we were created. We look to take an approach to projects that goes beyond jurisdictional boundaries. No individual city, water knows no bounds, so no individual city, like I mentioned before, can really face this issue on their own. We do have to work together. And so OneShoreline is created in order to facilitate that regional approach across jurisdictional boundaries. OneShoreline also takes a holistic approach to its objectives. So of course, flood protection is really the core of what we do, but for our projects, we also look to incorporate habitat and ecological objectives. This is a really important part. We want to prioritize nature-based solutions where possible. And we also look to incorporate recreational and connectivity benefits as part of what we do. We don't want to be building projects that are cutting off communities from the Bay shoreline and the Pacific coastline. These are the places that we cherish and love. And this is a lot of the reasons why people live in San Mateo County. And so we want our projects to enhance that connection rather than cut off that connection, while also protecting ourselves from what climate change will bring. Okay, so we most recently experienced San Mateo County's flood risk in the very major series of storms that came at the end of 2022 through mid-January, like I mentioned, ended about 10 days ago. And this is a bit of a snapshot into what was experienced throughout the county. Moving clockwise, we have photos from San Bruno, Half Moon Bay, Pescadero, a really compelling drone shot that was taken by the RCD, and flooding in Belmont. Of course, San Mateo County is very geographically diverse, and so the ways that residents experienced this flooding varied widely throughout the county, and these photos are just a snapshot, like I mentioned, just a sampling. If you do have photos of flooding that you are willing to share, please email me. My email will be at the end of this presentation. I'll also add it to the chat. We're actually looking to compile a countywide map that geotags those photos and maps them countywide, just to give us a sense of what impacts were experienced throughout the county, and particularly to try and get documentation from underreported areas of the county. Here were the precipitation totals that came in from that period of December 26th through January 17th. These are some sample numbers from the locations that are captured in those photos. So when you're estimating what is the general size of the storm that we experienced, that those series of storms over 3 weeks, it was on the order of an 100-year storm on the county's bay side, and then on the order of about a 50-year storm on the county coast side. So it's pretty safe to say this was an extraordinary series of events, but climate scientists have been saying for many years that these extraordinary storms will become more ordinary as time goes on. So this means like something like this 100-year storm, which is another way of saying a storm that has about a 1% chance of happening in any given year. This will become more common. So we'll be on the order of maybe a 10-year storm. So a 10% chance of happening every year. So in summary, these more rare events that we experience are going to become more common as climate change progresses. Another key component of how the extraordinary will turn into the ordinary is something that I think we're becoming much more familiar with in California, is this whiplash between drought and flooding conditions. And this was another example of that in San Mateo County and throughout the state of California, where we were in severe drought leading up to the storm. And then we had more than half of our annual precipitation within 16 days of that storm series. And now we've been upgraded from a severe drought to moderate drought. So the drought still persists despite the intense rainfall we received. And this is really going to become the new normal, where we have persistent, stubborn drought punctuated by intense bouts of rainfall. And that's something that we have been seeing in California in recent years, and we will continue to see. I'll also mention another component of the flood risk that we face in San Mateo County comes from sea level rise. And this is specific to areas along the Pacific coast side and the bay shoreline of San Mateo County. And I'll briefly walk through this phenomenon in the next 3 slides. So first, we're very familiar with tides, that we have 2 high tides daily, and they vary in height throughout the year. We actually just experienced the highest tides of the year, the king tide, this past weekend. With sea level rise, and we'll maybe wait for the animation to catch up here. With sea level rise, we have a gradual but permanent increase in those tide levels. So your high tides will become higher, your low tides will also become higher. So the base level of water that you have in the bay and in the Pacific Ocean will become permanently higher by a certain amount, and that will continue to grow as long as climate change continues to progress. And then during storms, a phenomenon called storm surge will then occur. And this is a temporary rise in water levels in the San Francisco Bay and on the Pacific coast. We saw this happening in waves overtopping Pacifica, Half Moon Bay, Pescadero, many different coastal communities in San Mateo County. And this is a temporary increase in water level due to low pressure systems and wind-driven waves. So when you have this happening at the same time as flooding from rivers and creeks that are coming down those creek channels and trying to drain to the San Francisco Bay or the Pacific Ocean, you have a convergence of floodwaters. You have high water levels in the bay and ocean, as well as high water levels coming down creeks. And so you have a compounded flood risk in these low-lying areas. And that's a really important thing to note, and that will only get worse as climate change progresses, and we're particularly vulnerable here in San Mateo County. So how do we address this flood risk? Definitely not going to be able to cover this in one slide. It's not a comprehensive list, but these are 3 kind of categories of actions that OneShoreline is engaged on, and I think many of my fellow panelists are engaged on and can speak to. So first, we have community building and emergency response. Really, what the core of what makes a community resilient is really strong, robust community connections. And that's a key part of what OneShoreline is focused on, and many other of my fellow panelists. Infrastructure projects, of course, this is both built and natural infrastructure, and this can range in a variety of scales, both parcel level with rain gardens or stormwater infrastructure at a parcel level, all the way up to large shoreline sea level rise protection projects. And then the third category of action that OneShoreline is also focused on is land use decisions. I heard Warner Chabot, who's the director of SFEI, say once that 90% of climate adaptation is land use decision making, which I could not agree with more. This photo, I like to pick on this development along the San Mateo County Bay shoreline. I think it's a really great example of how today we're reckoning with the land use decisions that were made in past decades, as well as they continue to be made today in projects that are getting built on the shoreline. You can see with this development, there is really no space between that walkway and the bay. I have a feeling that even with the king tides, that this development is experiencing flooding. When that tide gets up a little bit higher than usual, it will probably start to flood that walkway. So not only is this development at imminent risk of flooding, it's also very difficult when we're thinking about how do we adapt and protect this development from sea level rise. It's hard to know what our options are here. There's not space to really restore wetlands or have any sort of natural infrastructure that can provide a buffer between this development and the water. There's no space for levee. So really we're resorting to walls, sea walls, and that's really not desirable here. It's going to block views, it's going to cut off access. It's not really what we want climate adaptation to look like. And so OneShoreline is actually in the process of developing a sea level rise planning guidance. This is intended to be a resource document for the county and city staff as they're reviewing proposals like this of projects that are going to be built on their bay shoreline or on their Pacific coastline, and trying to incorporate considerations for sea level rise, stormwater and groundwater rise into their approval process. So this is not only for approvals of specific projects, but also could inform these larger visioning documents, like a general plan, a zoning update, a specific plan. These are the ways that cities make decisions on land use, and we're hoping to incorporate sea level rise into that process. And that's it for me. I'm happy to elaborate on any of those during the discussion, and my email is there. I'll also throw it in the chat. Thanks so much.
Thank you, McKenna. Tracy, do you want to throw the slide deck back up on the screen? Tracy? Oh, there we go. All right, so up next we have Reed Bogert with CCAG, City County Association of Governments. Reed, go ahead.
Thank you. Looks like you have my slides here. Yep, okay. So just as a way of introduction, great presentation so far. CCAG is a joint powers agency of the 21 municipalities in San Mateo County. And part of our work is focused on the stormwater program on behalf of the local agencies. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, and hoping to provide some context for how we are approaching stormwater management throughout the county with respect to new requirements under a municipal stormwater permit, and thinking about how all of the work that we've been doing over the past few years and thinking about how to prepare for climate change fits into the larger discussion of green infrastructure planning and implementation. So we'll go ahead and start the slides here. Skip to the next slide, please. There's a little background on our stormwater program, also called the San Mateo Countywide Water Pollution Prevention Program. We have an outreach program called Flow Bay, so those are some other names. We have a bit of a naming issue. And so I just wanted to share some of the nuts and bolts of the stormwater program, and actually the funding part is interesting. We have 2 property related fees that fund the stormwater program, and those add up to about 1.5 million countywide. We have a portion of the $10 vehicle registration fee that goes to regional stormwater management at about 1 million. And so we have, approximately 2.5 million per year to implement a complete comprehensive countywide stormwater program. That does not include some of the local revenue that agencies collect within the municipalities for this purpose. But I will say that that's not a lot of money at this scale. And the local agencies are very constrained as well in terms of their funding. They're typically drawing on general funds for basic storm drain infrastructure needs, which get hit hard with storms like we've seen recently. And that has to do with a proposition on the state constitution, which limits the ability to raise stormwater fees. So this is a big deal, but we provide support to our municipalities in a variety of ways. Much of it is focused on green infrastructure planning of late. So I'm going to talk mostly about that. Next slide. Okay, just wanted to summarize the new municipal regional stormwater permit, also known as MRP 3.0. It's the 3rd iteration of a regional stormwater permit for all municipalities in the Bay Area, operating under the large municipal stormwater permit for cities and local jurisdictions that have separate storm sewers. And that includes everyone except for San Francisco, essentially. But there's a whole new laundry list really of requirements for implementing stormwater programs regionally and in the county. And you can see on the list here, I'll kind of run through these quickly. This is new work in many ways, and some of it touches on issues of dealing with stormwater in new ways, not so much in terms of flooding, which I think is important, but we have new regulated project categories, so new types of projects being required to implement stormwater controls. There are numeric targets for building green infrastructure. We have a new focus on legacy pollutant, PCBs in old industrial areas, new monitoring requirements. We have to now look at discharges associated with unsheltered populations, dealing with firefighting foam and firefighting discharge activities. There's an asset management requirement, cost reporting. So there's quite a lot that's new. And this, of course, adds cost to the municipalities and to our program, for which we don't have additional revenue. So that makes things hard. And this is kind of what the world we're facing as we continue to deal with the regulations, but also changing climate. So next slide. Okay, and so green infrastructure is one of the solutions to many of the problems, actually, and we tend to think about it and apply it in different scales. So there are three basic scales here. Parcel-based green infrastructure, I'll just run through these quickly. You're capturing rain where it falls on site, slowing it down, sinking it into the soils, and this happens mostly through development and redevelopment projects. And is paid for by the development community primarily. It could apply to public regulated projects at a certain scale as well. And then street projects are capturing rainwater runoff from a block level or bigger, and then channeling it into what we call curb extensions, stormwater curb extensions, or rain gardens attached to a sidewalk, like the picture there. And these projects are mostly paid for by municipalities with limited funding, often looking for grants to pay for these projects. And then at the regional scale, you can capture rain from hundreds or thousands of acres of watershed, store it underground, and parks, playing fields at schools, parking lots could make really good settings for these types of projects, and there are many additional benefits that come with them. So I'm gonna share some of the details there. Again, funding is constrained on a big project like that. That could cost $30 million to build. So next slide. All right, I'm gonna walk us through some pictures of green infrastructure at those different scales and kind of touch on some of the new requirements in the stormwater permit that are kicking in and how that relates to what we're talking about today. So new regulated projects, new development projects. This is the Half Moon Bay Library project at a certain scale are required to install green infrastructure on site. And so that there's a threshold that went from 10,000 square feet of impervious area added or replaced down to 5,000 square feet. So it's a much lower threshold for these new requirements, and it could apply to public or private projects. You might see this on multifamily dwelling projects, apartment buildings, condos. It could apply to institutions of various kinds, industrial facilities, commercial, residential properties, which would not have been regulated in past. Thinking more in the line of like a duplex, where you might have a lot that's split between two properties, small residential, detached or attached, single family, essentially regulated at a 5,000 square foot threshold. So, and I think this is important because, it's good in a sense to have more projects doing green infrastructure to help reduce the impacts of stormwater in the urban community, in the urban landscape, but there is a cost to that, to the developers, to public agencies doing this work. So something to consider. Next slide. And here's an image of what maybe an apartment complex might look like with these new regulations. maybe, thinking of a duplex again. Next slide, I think, shows something that could be perceived as a duplex. I think it's a rendering. So this is from our green infrastructure design guide. And so, these properties in past would not have green infrastructure requirements. Moving forward, this would be maybe a project that now has to install green infrastructure on site. Next slide. And new also in the permit, it is single family homes, large homes. So this is kind of a good picture. Any property, residential single family home property that is adding or replacing 10,000 square feet of impervious surface would need to capture and treat all of the rain falling on that property through green infrastructure or low impact development. So here's a picture of what could be a roof, green roof garden on top there. There are different strategies to deal with this. This is totally new. And again, I think the upside is that residential properties are now part of the solution. But it's also going to be challenging to implement these new requirements and to enforce them through the municipality. So next slide, keep going through some pictures here. Streets are another area of expansion under the requirements for green infrastructure in the new permit. So road reconstruction projects and also some road maintenance projects will be required to have green infrastructure. Could be rain garden essentially installed on a street or other types of green infrastructure in the public right of way. And so there are some kind of deep, some in the weeds details about what would trigger these requirements, but a larger road project that is going to be reconstructing the road at an acre size and including new sidewalks or a bike lane would be required to add green infrastructure. Some of the smaller maintenance type activities that would be pretty commonplace, including grinding down the pavement to the base course under the asphalt would trigger green infrastructure requirements at a smaller threshold. So even just 5,000 square feet of material being added or replaced and connected. So it'd be contiguous amount of surface being added or replaced would trigger green infrastructure requirements. So that gives you a sense, I think, for what the new permit is putting into place and what the communities will start to see as these projects are built. Next slide, please. Sorry, I have a sick child at home, so bear with me, background noise. Here's another image of a transition. So this is El Camino Real. And if you click to the next slide, you'll see kind of what a transformation of a sustainable street, what we call sustainable streets, look like, where you have green infrastructure and a separated bike lane. So this is really an ideal, I think, setting. And again, if a city is going to be doing a large maintenance project on a road, they might opt for something like this, and it would be a requirement to install the trees and the bioretention areas associated with that. Okay, next slide. Okay, at the regional scale, we have done quite a bit of work in our program to advance a collaborative approach to large multi-benefit stormwater capture projects. And here the intent is really to help with the flooding impacts to the extent that we can. All the green infrastructure I shared in the last few slides is intended to support water quality goals primarily, and also hydrology benefits in terms of not increasing the flow of runoff associated with development and preventing impacts to receiving waters to creeks and the drainage system. Regional projects can capture hundreds of acres of feet of water on an annual basis. There are some limits in terms of the volume of water that can be captured on a big storm. So we've seen these 5 inches of rain in a single day. And as Makena mentioned, that could be a 100-year storm for what we're used to, and future storms could be bigger than that. A regional project could divert a portion of that peak flow on a large storm, store underground. So the picture here on the left is Orange Memorial Park. Regional stormwater capture project is built. It's in the ground. It's operating. Hopefully survived the storm well. And when the water is there, these are strategically placed to capture and potentially infiltrate into the groundwater system if that's if the soils are amenable and the groundwater is far enough underground to allow that. And this project is designed to infiltrate 200 plus acre feet of water per year. You can capture and reuse the water, treat it to a certain level for on-site irrigation, which this project is also doing. There's potential additional community benefits. So the image of the dots in the water drainage areas on the left there as well is an output from a recent assessment countywide that our program did to look for opportunities for these projects. We have 10 high priority sites and 5 new project concepts ready to go for additional design work. So these are great, and you can see the bullet points of the main drivers behind these. We worked with Makena's team on developing multi-benefit drivers for cost efficiency on water quality work, flood reduction, as I mentioned, dealing with climate change adaptation, reducing the peak flow, augmenting water supply, and more. So this is kind of the path forward for us. Funding is going to be a challenge though. So we're looking to our state legislators to support funding, which we've done in past, making earmark requests for building large infrastructure like this. This is going to be part of the solution. Again, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach. Everything helps, but this is definitely a piece of the solution that we are leaning into as we look at dealing with larger storms. Next slide. And then last couple of pictures here, I just wanted to share some other opportunities for communities to be involved in this work. Our program does have a couple of rebate programs for rain barrels and rain gardens. And so these numbers and the cities listed here just show where we've been partnering over the past couple of years, 2 years, to do bulk pre-order distribution events on rain barrels, where folks can go into a website, order barrels online. We have them shipped out from the East Coast. They're 100% recycled barrels. They're $80. You can get basically all your money back on that cost. And then we distribute the barrels on a single event on a weekend. So we did 4 of those this year, 800 barrels distributed. This is really cool. We're really excited about this program, and people are jazzed up about it too. So I think as far as community action, this is a good place to start. Next slide. And partnership, I think CADE is going to get into this, maybe Kellex as well, but the program is also focusing on engaging schools on greening up campuses for water resilient schoolyards. And we have done rain barrel and cistern installations at schools over the past several years, just pilot projects. We have about 10 or 12 of those at different schools throughout the county. We've done rain garden installations. We've done conceptual project planning in support of schools. We had a grant funded opportunity to support San Carlos School District this past year. And so this is a great bridge between the goals of managing stormwater more sustainably, dealing with the impacts of climate change, including drought and increased precipitation, and thinking about how to use the landscape, being land managers, public agencies, schools are public lands. And so how can we encourage them to reconfigure the landscape to manage stormwater better, support students with outdoor classrooms and learning opportunities around the concept of rain. So, and climate change. So all good things. And we look forward to continuing this work moving forward. And I think with that, I will conclude my slides. I think I just had one more with the contact information. And so thanks for listening in, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Reed. And I'm seeing some questions are coming in through the chat, and panelists, feel free to answer them in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of the questions during the Q&A as well. But in the interest of time, because we have 2 more panelists left, we want to make sure those happen at the end. So Kelix Nelson from the San Mateo Resource Conservation District is up next. And Kelix, I believe you have your own slide deck, right?
I do. I'll share my slides. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, I have to wait for you to stop. Okay, great. Thanks. There we go. You all can see that, right? Yep. Great. Thanks. So yeah, I'm just really glad to be here today. This topic is near and dear to us at the RCD in our work that primarily uses nature-based solutions to protecting both human and natural communities. So a little bit, I think some people aren't familiar with what an RCD or Resource Conservation District is. We're a special district that was formed back in 1939 to serve as a local hub for conservation. Our job, our responsibility is to help people help the land, and we do that in a very boots on the ground way, very applied. So even though there are about 100 conservation districts in the state, and we've been around since the 30s, probably most of you have never heard from us. But this idea that we protect and support our communities by caring for its land and waters has been in state statute since 1938. And it was as a result of, in response to the Dust Bowl crisis, that we were formed. So how we work is basically we provide some very, very diverse services across jurisdictions, across public and private lands, at property, landscape, and regional scales, property by property. And we provide holistic, integrated natural resource management. As this notes in the slide, very diverse tools for doing that. But one feature is that literally everything we do, baked into our DNA in statute, is everything is in partnership. We work where we are invited. And so this holistic, integrated natural resource management occurs across a variety of program areas: water quality, water supply, managing flood, managing for drought, climate adaptation, climate mitigation, restoring habitat for threatened and endangered species, ensuring secure food systems, and most recently a big focus on forest health and fire resilience. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit today about how all these things come together in a situation like the storms that we just had. But here's the goal. The goal is healthy habitats, a healthy food system, healthy local economies. I want to just take a moment to talk about watersheds. Wherever you are on this earth, unless you're in the ocean, you're in a watershed. And a watershed is simply a drainage basin. This is a map of our local watersheds. And I'm going to focus today, I'm going to zoom in on the south coast of San Mateo County in a case study of the Pescadero watershed. So forests, headwaters, and stream valleys provide essential habitat for wildlife, but they also provide really complex ecosystem services. They can reduce both flooding and drought. They can protect our water resources. They contribute to local economies, recreation. But the opposite is also true. When impaired, these lands contribute to flooding, drought, erosion, water pollution, etc. And so this is what happens when ecosystem function is disrupted. Alteration of creeks in this watershed, as well as historic logging practices, accelerated sedimentation that completely filled a creek. It literally ceased to exist. And the water, of course, then needed someplace to go, so it simply flowed across properties, across roads, and caused regular damage, and ultimately also contributed to or caused this, you see on the lower right, this stranding of steelhead trout and oxygen depleted water or oxygen starved water, causing annual mortality events of sometimes hundreds of steelhead trout in Pescadero Marsh. And these were federally protected species. Poorly managed soils and altered hydrology opened up this huge gully in one storm. And look at the person in the upper left to get a sense of scale. This happened in one storm. Not only did this landowner lose a huge chunk of their property, but also it risked compromising a nearby county road and stream crossing bridge over the creek, which was a huge threat for safety. Channelizing creeks, loss of floodplains, and various watershed impacts can cause stream banks to cleave off and cause damage. It can expose septic systems, loss of property, and very dangerous. And how we manage our forests also has created overstocked, weaker trees and potentially catastrophic fuel loads that exacerbated the conditions and this fire from August of 2020. Forest management and wildfire can compound storm impacts and flooding. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. Here we go. So what you're looking at here is an example of this road that went back to these homes had a small creek under it that went through a culvert, probably exacerbated by the fires. The sedimentation, there were mudslides. You can see a mudslide right here that went up pretty much to the base of this house. Fortunately, thank goodness, did not take the house out, wasn't any worse. But it also filled the culvert under the road. Then the water needed to find a way to go, and it chewed through the road. And now these people are disconnected. Their homes are disconnected, and they have to rebuild this property. Cuts off access and egress, emergency response, and there's a lot of work for them to do. These are log jams from the recent storms. The one on the left was easily, I think at this point, a 500-foot long, slow moving wall. It's like a slow moving tsunami of wood heading towards the town of Pescadero, taking out property and heading towards bridges and roads, and likely exacerbated and worsened by how we manage our forests and how we manage our creeks, and also by the fires. And so there's a lot of work then to be done to try to remove those. You can see on the right, the workers that are pulling some of the pieces of wood off, they are walking across the top of a creek there. That's how bad that log jam is. And then this, you can see where my cursor is right now, is where one of these log jams was forming. So Pescadero Creek right here goes down through and around the town of Pescadero. And these log jams could easily, no exaggeration, take out a good chunk of the town. So what are we doing about it? We work from the top to the bottom of watersheds to restore ecosystem process with a lot of partners. We've been restoring thousands of acres of forests in San Mateo County to improve biodiversity, but also to reduce the risk of catastrophic fire. On the hills and the rangelands, we help farmers and ranchers draw greenhouse gases down from the atmosphere where they're harmful and store them in soils and vegetation where they're helpful, and build a more resilient food system to boot. We help individual ranches or farms develop a carbon farm plan to reduce emissions and sequester carbon in ways that improve their resilience to storms and drought while improving habitat. The bottom image here shows the plan we developed for Tomcat Ranch in Pescadero, mapping out site-specific practices that work within the ranching operation. And then what we're able to do is quantify the potential carbon capture of each proposed practice as part of developing the plan. And then we worked with San Mateo County to include these practices in a new chapter of the county's Community Climate Action Plan that focuses on working in natural lands, working lands meaning, like agricultural lands, for example. And our vision, what we see as feasible, is that by the year 2045, we will have that all agricultural lands in San Mateo County are sequestering carbon with substantial benefits, the equivalencies that are on this slide. It's absolutely astonishing what can happen. But also those practices improve their resilience to drought and flooding and all sorts of extreme impacts and climate change. We also help people improve roads, stream crossings, and creeks to store and manage sediment beneficially throughout the watershed. We've restored hundreds of acres of wetlands and floodplains that give both water and sediment a place to go, reducing the flooding where it's destructive and increasing it where it can create habitat, like wetland habitat for many species of wildlife. This video that I'm going to show you is from it's time-lapse photography from one site where we restored about 107 acres of wetland by reconnecting the creek to its historic floodplain, basically letting the creek flood and letting it drop out sediment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of points in this. On this, do you see these spikes right here? Those are to help us measure and monitor how much sediment is being deposited. So we can go back and see that as the water comes up from a storm, it floods the banks, and when it recedes, they're gone. There was so much sediment that came down from the upper watershed that it filled that entire area. I'm going to show you again from here. Look where those spikes are and watch the water come up from the storm. And then the creek recedes. So this takes pressure off the system, basically. And remember that creek that had disappeared. We worked across state, county, and 2 private properties to reestablish the creek and significantly reduce the flooding, while also, excitingly, reestablishing the ancestral migration corridor for endangered coho salmon that used to spawn in this watershed and had become entirely extirpated from that watershed, and now they're back. And then we beneficially reused that sediment from the removal area and deposited it in ways throughout Pescadero Marsh that fixed the poor water quality conditions that have been killing the steelhead trout. So that's just sort of a small subset of the kind of work that we do with many partners to build overall resilience to extreme drought and storms and other things. Note that among these projects are, on this slide here, are a number of water storage projects that capture all of this water when it's abundant to have as water security when it's not abundant, including times of drought. And we're also working with Caltrans to inform their sea level rise planning in these areas and have a few managed retreat projects in development, as well as in the more urbanized areas, rain garden and rain barrel projects and neighborhoods, that sort of thing. So there's a lot that we're doing of hundreds of projects that are in progress. And I'm excited to report that soon we'll be publishing a 15-year impact report with some of the work that's been going on. But this is just a snapshot that kind of talks about these nature-based solutions. And if you'd like to learn more, please visit our website or any of these pages. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Calix. That was a really beautiful presentation. We are going to move on to our last speaker, last but not least, Kate Kennedy from Climate Resilience Communities. And Tracy, I think we're going to put up our slide deck for this, and then we will get to discussion after this.
Thank you very much, Anna. As we wait to pull that up, I'd just like to reflect on how, I don't know if it's just because I'm a deeply nerdy individual, but I was getting kind of excited seeing all those cool projects that are underway and all the great work that's being done. So I'm looking forward to all the things we can accomplish together. So like I said, my name is Cade Kennedy. I'm a program manager and a community organizer with Climate Resilient Communities. And if you go to the next slide. So Climate Resilient Communities, or CRC, is a community organization that's dedicated to serving communities that are really going to be on the front lines of climate change. And those are communities that have the least resources to adapt. And so primarily in San Mateo County, we work in East Palo Alto, we work in North Fair Oaks, and we work in Bellhaven as well, which is a neighborhood in Menlo Park. Next slide. And what we like to do at CRC is really focus on putting the community first. And so these were some of the images that were sent to me just from folks on that New Year's Eve flooding event that we had. Here you can see there's 2 photos on the right are from the Woodland Park Apartments that are up there by the Four Seasons in East Palo Alto. And you can see a lot of the water moving through the street there on Manhattan Avenue. So there's a lot of folks who we've been trying to connect with the resources that Kirsten had mentioned through PCE to get those vehicles replaced, and see what we can do to help out the community. Next slide. And so the way that CRC works is primarily through our climate change community teams. And these are composed of residents, nonprofit leaders, members of the faith community, and people in business, really just folks who are particularly interested and excited about preparing their communities to adapt to the changing climate. And these teams really serve as a vehicle to form and express community preferences related to climate change, and ultimately ensure that all of CRC's work is guided by community voices. Next slide. So in addition to constructing climate change community teams in each of the neighborhoods that we're working in and each of the communities we're working in, we worked in East Palo Alto to conduct a community-based adaptation assessment, where we did a lot of an extensive community outreach, engagement, and educational and capacity building work to really hear from the community in a broad way about what their priorities were for adapting to climate change. And one thing that came up over and over in those conversations was longtime residents. So this was back in 2019, and longtime residents of East Palo Alto really remembered the flooding that happened in 1998, where there was about $40 million in damages done, and a lot of families were displaced from the community. So that was really front and center for folks all the way back in 2019. Next slide. So after that outreach project and that really extensive community engagement, the community really prioritized responses to flooding that offered other benefits that were immediate, tangible, and made material differences in their lives. So with that feedback and with the direction of our climate change community team and the broader community of East Palo Alto, we applied for and received about $1 million grant from the Coastal Conservancy to install 25 rain gardens at private residences in East Palo Alto. And in addition, there is a bunch of different project components that are coming along with this, but there's an explicit focus on outreach and education through workshops to really explain to folks the benefits of green stormwater infrastructure, as well as nature-based solutions to climate change. Included in our project is workforce development. We're training garden ambassadors to maintain these rain gardens even after they've been installed and well into the future, building out their skills that can be transferable to other types of jobs. We're really helping folks we're investing in the community. So we're helping folks install these gardens on their private residences, helping to manage stormwater where it falls in place, as well as, building in some sovereignty into the situation by planting native and edible species, by planting species that serve as pollinator habitat, and also by installing cisterns, which can help us, like a lot of folks have mentioned, during those times when we have too much rain and too little rain. We're also doing a lot of work to model this project with various machine learning algorithms in order to understand at what scale these types of decentralized projects can actually tip the cost benefit analysis into, proving that the flood reduction benefits of this type of work at a large scale outweighs the costs associated with the installation. Next slide. And like I said, so yeah, what immediately stood out to the community was the multiple compounding benefits of these types of nature-based solutions. And I really want to make the point here that these types of investments, particularly in solutions with multi-benefits, are an opportunity to make reparations in a lot of ways. And we can do that through the installation of these systems and sort of work to undo the consequences of decades of historical marginalization and systems of oppression. So we don't have to just let climate change be something that drives inequality in our community, in our county. It can actually be something that we adapt to in a way that creates a more just, resilient, and equitable society for us all. So I think that today's focus and all the different folks you've heard from talking about the benefits of these types of solutions is really the way forward for our county. And if we conduct these projects in a way that puts community voices and residents really in control of the process from the jump, we not only produce better solutions, not only produce solutions that are immediately bought into by the community, but we can produce solutions that ultimately serve to undo the harms that we've caused along the way. So I really like to thank all of the other panelists that have been here today and spoken. And I'm happy to explain more about this project, but I wanted to move quickly so that we have time to answer all of the great questions I've seen piling up in the chat. So with that, you can go one more slide for folks and for my contact information, and I'll turn it over back to the group so we can all discuss.
Thank you, Cade. And I do want to point out, we're going to send out an email to all of the participants, and we'll make sure that everyone's contact is in there so that you can connect with panelists after this discussion. I did want to start with just asking the panelists, we're all talking about collaborating and everyone's doing such wonderful work. Could you give us maybe the 1-minute summary of if I'm on this call and I don't have an existing working relationship with you, what's the first step? How does your organization develop those working relationships and partnerships with others? If I could get each of the panelists to address that one first.
I'm going to put my email in the chat. Reach out to me or my colleague Vanessa, who's also on the phone call here.
Similar response. Yeah, feel free to email me directly. We have a mighty team of 4, so you're reaching 1/4 of the staff at OneShoreline if you email me. We can have a conversation from there.
Yeah, same here for CCAG and the stormwater program. Very open to interest and inquiries from potential partners. And as I mentioned in the chat, we often actually work on a willing partner basis. So we do have program funding to support projects that relate to pilot green infrastructure implementation, and are continuing to look for opportunities to find new partners. So please reach out.
Yeah, I think everyone sort of recognizes that we're stronger together. So we're always looking to collaborate in whatever way possible, as long as it's to the benefit of our communities and everything. So happy to talk to any.
For us, as I mentioned before, all of our work literally by definition is in partnership. We only work where we're invited, so invite us.
And Calix, is that residents, organizations, any category? Okay.
Yeah, we've worked with residential properties on rainwater harvesting, sustainable landscaping, permeable pavers. We've worked with equestrian owners on like forest manure composting and manure bunkers. We've worked with people in like the city of Pacifica who live on the 4 corners of a stream crossing that causes flooding. And then all the upper more natural areas. We do anything that's natural resource related, where we're invited, but mostly focusing on the western half of the county.
That's good context. A while back, I saw a question in the chat about land use, and that kind of piqued my interest because we're in quite the planning year. We have the county and several cities updating the safety element or their various safety elements. And so, having Makena, you talked about how what we understood as a 100-year event might now be something like a 10-year event, right? And so with this changing information, what type of land use policies do we need to be encouraging our jurisdictions to consider?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I plugged our sea level rise planning guidance that we're currently developing. Unfortunately, not publicly available yet, very much in draft mode. We're writing that text this week. But We're hoping to release it this spring for public comment. So please keep your eye out for that. And if you're engaged with me directly, I'll make sure that you're in the loop to review those types of guidelines and provide input. But yeah, the types of guidelines we're looking to include there range from buffer zones. So this is speaking to a little bit about the conversation on managed retreat and how delicate that is. And it's really a difficult topic and something that it's awesome that the RCD has been proving can be implementable in their work. And then it's also really difficult, especially on the urban bay side. But buffer zones is a provision we're looking to incorporate in that guidance, which is an 100-foot buffer zone setback, whatever you'd like to call it, off of the San Francisco Bay is a recommendation we're suggesting, as well as buffer zones off of creeks, 35 feet. Just to have some space, not have that situation that I illustrated earlier with that building right up against the water. Another provision that we're looking to provide is having developers that are building on the bay shoreline have a shoreline protection incorporated into their development. So rather than just placing their buildings and then having some agency, maybe like OneShoreline, come in later and maybe disrupt that property with protection, trying to build protection or levees, having that incorporated into development from the very beginning. If we're going to be developing that part of the shoreline, having that protection built in and adaptable is something that we're recommending there. And then kind of an overlap with Reed's work, where I'm actually referencing CCAG's guidance and studies on this. How do we upsize our stormwater infrastructure to account for that change in future storms? So like I mentioned, the 10-year storm in the future might be on the order of an 100-year storm today. So we're having some recommendations to model what that future increase in rainfall will look like and have your stormwater systems be designed to the future 25-year. Future is a key word there because that's going to be very different than today. So Reed actually been wanting to reach out to have your input on that, but that's referencing CCAG's work on how rainfall will increase in San Mateo County.
Kate, I'd actually like to repeat that question to you, particularly because CRC works with renters so often, and you actually do have, experience with Menlo Park safety element update. What kind of policies, especially looking at such a great impact on our renter population in San Mateo County throughout the storms this month, what types of policies or projects should we be considering?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, well, one thing that I think is under discussed in these sort of conversations is that right now, if you take the case of Belhaven, for instance, the average homeowner there pays about 4% of their median income in flood insurance, and that's if they have a mortgage on their home. That's mandatory expenditure, and that's a really significant burden for a lot of folks. And if you're in Belhaven and you decide, if you paid your home off, then you can decide not to invest in flood insurance, but then you risk, kind of complete financial ruin in the case of a severe flood event. So I think having access specifically to programs that can make that expense a lot more affordable for folks is a really immediate concern for many residents there. And then looking at the renter side of things, renters themselves often don't carry flood insurance or renter's insurance for specific types of property loss during that sort of event. So there's a lot of vulnerability, particularly when it comes to these kind of unanticipated flood events that are becoming more and more common. And that's something that I think that a regional collaboration around sea level rise has the opportunity to make a big impact on. Reducing, like eliminating an expenditure that's 4% of your annual median income would, with like one fell swoop, really do a lot to close the gaps in wealth inequality just between Belhaven and the rest of Menlo Park. So I think there's some low-hanging fruit like that, that there is a lot of opportunities to adapt around that might not be specific to the built infrastructure conversation.
To any of our panelists, do you see a need for changes in our flood mapping? I mean, I know we don't control the regulatory maps, but is there a need to provide better risk communication to our residents, particularly after what I observed was a lot of surprise throughout the last couple of weeks? Where do you think we need to make some changes in terms of risk communication and perception?
Oh, sorry, Rico.
I was just going to share that I think when we see a big storm like this, we see heavily impacted localized areas. Often, that's a result of the aging infrastructure not working how it should, or it's undersized, for this design storm. And a lot of the storm drain infrastructure is designed for at least a minimum 10-year return storm. So, much more often smaller storm than what we're seeing now. And that's just for, regular kind of operations. Some of it may have to do with pump stations or pumping systems not working properly. I think we saw that in some areas. And as far as the, how to plan for and what regulations say about future storms, we, at least on the stormwater side, we're not seeing that yet. I'm not totally up to speed with what's happening with FEMA flood maps in relation to climate change planning and adaptation. I'm sure that's something that's being discussed and worked on at the state level and down to the regional and local levels. But it's an important question in terms of how to size facilities properly with respect to anticipated storms and how things change over time. So I would not be surprised if in the next 5 or 10 years from now, we're seeing changes in the standards, design standards for green infrastructure for stormwater management. Say, that's one piece of it. As of now, the standards are based on historical rainfall records. So that's how things are built to specification.
Makena, were you going to add something? Was that you? Or
Me.
Calix? Sorry.
I was wanting to reflect that I think that the challenge ahead of us with that is how to accurately represent the threats so that people can prepare without that data being weaponized against people, so that they just lose their insurance, for example, or have certain activities restricted. And we've seen that happen with flood mapping and with fire hazard mapping and various other things when we're trying to get finer resolution understanding of the risks that people face, that we can bring solutions, that the restrictions or the losses to them sometimes happen faster than the solutions. And I think that's a challenge for us to navigate.
Well, we're at 4:30. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for questions. We were very greedy and we wanted all of these panelists to come, so that was less time for questions. But we will be sending out an email with everyone's contact information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us at the Thrive team or directly to the panelists. So what this event is all about, getting people to talk to each other more. And you can send any burning questions directly to the panelists as well. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you to all of our panelists. Amazing presentations, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Have a good evening, everyone.